Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us and spending some of your afternoon with us today. My name is Jennifer Miller Herzog. I'm the Mid-Atlantic Senior Program Manager for the Land Trust Alliance, and I'm here with Eric Eckel, who is the owner and principal for Waterwords That Work. We want to thank River Network for the opportunity to talk with you all this afternoon. Thanks, River Network. I'm so pleased to be here. Before we start and kick off today's webinar, we just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the unprecedented times that we are in. We know that people's lives and work have been profoundly disrupted by the current health crisis. We also know it could be a while before you are able to put into practice what we are talking about today. I know for me, though, that looking ahead to the future and finding creative ways to keep my work moving ahead right now is really energizing. So we're really glad you're here investing your time to expand your outreach toolbox in anticipation of the days when you will be back out on these fence lines and on these riverbanks with landowners in the future. So I just wanted to provide a quick bit of context for why I am here. Actually, first I'm going to, Eric, if you want to go to the next slide. This is what we plan to cover this afternoon. I'll be doing sort of the introductions and acknowledgements. I'm the warm-up band, and then we'll turn it over to Eric, who's sort of the main event, and then I'll come back in perhaps for a guest spot with the Q&A when we get to that point. And we can go to the next slide. I just wanted to share a bit of context for why I am here. So the Land Trust Alliance, some of you may know us. We're a national organization committed to saving the places that people need and love across America. We do that by building stronger and more sustainable land trusts. Those are organizations who work with landowners on voluntary, permanent conservation of their private land. So we do for land trusts kind of what River Network does for watershed organizations. And I joined my organization to work on a special initiative in the Chesapeake watershed starting in 2016. I work on an effort called the Chesapeake Land and Water Initiative. This has been a partnership of the Land Trust Alliance and the Chesapeake Bay Funders Network to try to bring land conservation and watershed restoration together into closer partnerships. So we are leveraging already conserved land and new land conservation to achieve greater water quality benefits and greater water quality improvements. So those of us who came out of the watershed restoration community, we used to say that land drives water quality, or land management drives water quality. We wanted to get the land conservation community in the watershed restoration game. So I came out of the watershed restoration community. You can go ahead, Eric, to the next one. And what I realized is when I was working on watershed restoration, there were some key questions that were keeping us up at night. Things like, how do you access more land to put in best management practices for water quality? How do you reach landowners who are managing that land and can make those decisions that will help improve water quality? The question of permanence, you put the money and effort into putting in a practice. How do you know it will still be there and delivering the water quality benefits that it was put in there for the first place to achieve? And then who's got eyes on these practices long term? That's what was keeping me up at night as a watershed restoration advocate. When I moved over to land conservation, there was a whole new set of questions that was keeping land trusts up at night. Things like, how do we stay relevant in our communities? How do we get more public support for our work? We were doing habitat work, open space, farmland protection. Watershed restoration is a logical partner for all of that. How do we respond to community values? So all of you in the water world know how high water issues, watershed protection, the safety and health of rivers and streams poll for Americans. It's a top concern over the last 30 years, the top concern. So linking land conservation to water quality and safety and health of our waterways is a great strategy, I think, for land trusts to remain relevant. And then for land conservation too, how do we access more funding to not just protect land, but to make that land deliver better water quality over time? So Eric, one quick click, I realized that these two communities were basically each other's answers to those burning questions. And so there are some really logical and natural partnerships that can and are emerging around watershed protection and land conservation. And that's the work that I've been doing in the Chesapeake. So Eric, if you go to the next. Just to review, I think a lot of you probably are aware of land trusts. You may be partners with them in the places where you are all working, but I think you all also know, but it always bears repeating, that land trusts have some really important resources that are useful, including that they already have existing relationships with landowners, that they have easements on their properties with. Those easements are permanent and legal agreements, so those are negotiated agreements on land with landowners, not unlike what you do in the process of putting BMPs in place as well. So just helping land trusts figure out how to move those conversations and negotiations from land conservation into better practices. Land trusts and land conservation, it's a voluntary undertaking, not a regulatory undertaking. So land trusts occupy sort of a different space than government and regulatory actors do. And then they have to perform regular monitoring and stewardship of those easements. When they have an easement and a legal agreement with the landowner, they need to be monitoring those properties at least annually to make sure that all of the conservation values are still in place. And what's great about that is they're, boots on the ground and eyes on the ground for what is happening on that land, working with those landowners. And again, land conservation easements are permanent, like forever, in perpetuity. So that provides some permanence for some of the water quality restoration work that you all are doing. Land trusts also, some of them do require best management practices on some of their easements. So they're also already advocating for some of the things that you are all working on. And some of them also are doing restoration work on their own and have some of that technical capacity in-house. So just wanted to give a quick reminder and a plug for land trusts as partners and why that's a good bet for the watershed restoration community. So I wanted to do a couple more thank yous too. Eric and I want to definitely acknowledge some of our partners on this project. We did not do it alone. Bobby Whitescarver, who is a Shenandoah Valley farmer and a 30-year veteran of the NRCS. Bobby worked with us all along the way. He helped to run focus groups. He did our in-person trainings with us. So it was great to have his experience and on-the-ground knowledge. And then Avia Heisman, who is Eric's colleague at Waterwords That Work, she project managed this whole thing for us. So wanted to acknowledge them today. Next slide. We also wanted to thank our partners and funders for the work we did in the Chesapeake together, which today's work is based on, as well as work in Michigan, which I'll talk about in a second. Our funders included the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Fund, and also the Foundation for Pennsylvania Watersheds. They provided direct funding for the Closing the Deal project. And then the Chesapeake Bay Funders Network supported my time on the project in helping to implement it. And then next slide. And I mentioned that there are Michigan roots to this project as well. Waterwords That Work, before I came into the picture, originally did some work back in 2017 for the Michigan Association of Conservation Districts with support from these funders. So that was the start of all of this. We continued to build it out in the Chesapeake and now are happy to share it with you today. So we also put together a group of mentors. Let's see. This is a list of the mentors that we worked with. Huge gratitude to them. They were nominated by their peers as being among the very best in the field at working with landowners. We asked people to tell us who they thought did the best work in the field with landowners, and they gave enormously of their time in completing both surveys and participating in some focus groups for us so that we could benefit from their wisdom. So a huge thank you to them. And then Eric, I think we finally, just to let you know a little more about these mentors, we asked them about the practices that they had been working with landowners on. This is an enormously experienced group. We asked, have you done these practices with more than 5 landowners? And this is what they told us. So we were looking for their engagement on some of the top water quality best management practices. And we learned this and a whole lot more from them, which Eric is going to share with you. So I'm going to hand it off to Eric. Are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy.
Thanks, Jennifer. So I'm going to tell you a funny story before I get into it. So at Waterwords at Work, the firm started as a presentation called Waterwords at Work at the River Rally. And I've been to many river rallies over the years. And one time I was at the River Rally and I was talking to somebody at one of the networking events, and I said that I was going to go to the Land Trust Alliance rally this year. And that person looked me straight in the eye and with a completely straight face. So this is the River Rally, if you can imagine. She said, without a trace of humor, she said, well, it's a good conference, but there will be no naked bongos at midnight at the Land Trust rally. What did we learn? Here's the big question that we tried to answer with this project. What do the best field conservationists do differently from the rest? What do the top ag mentors, the top field staff, the ones who are most likely to walk into a kitchen table meeting at a farmhouse and walk out with some kind of agreement to do a conservation practice, what are they doing differently from the rest? And so Jennifer showed you we have more than 50 experts nominated by their peers in the field weigh in on their tips, their tricks, their approach to the work, and what they see that they're doing differently from others who are either just starting out or others who have maybe hit a plateau and can't seem to rise above it. So that's the big question that we were trying to ask with this project. And here's who we did this work for. We did this to produce findings and trainings for people like yourselves who are looking to get into working with rural landowners to conserve their land in some way. So I've got this kind of slide here. One of the gentlemen here says, I'm not long out of school. I'm new on the job. I'm eager to share my book knowledge, and I don't know anything about sales. We observe that many of the conservation field staff are coming into this work with a background in natural resources. They've had no training or preparation for any kind of a sales role, a persuasion role, a marketing role. And then the second kind of person that we were aiming at here is someone who's a few years in and is doing okay, but isn't great. And we wanted to give that person a few pointers so that they can become great. That's who this information was gathered for. And we did it in two phases. The most recent phase was in the Chesapeake. And so we surveyed 45 mentors. We did a focus group with 8 of those mentors on some of the issues that they raised. And then we did a second focus group with 10 more on some of the unique considerations around the Plains sect in Lancaster County and elsewhere. And then prior to that, we started this project off in Michigan. We did an in-depth literature review. We did a survey of the top field staff. We did 3 focus groups with top field staff. And then we did a 4th focus group with farmers themselves. So there's been a lot of, we call it market research in my business, that has gone into the advice and the findings that I'm about to share with you here today. And so here's one of the big, top, really important takeaways. And that's that the mentors who are successful at working with private landowners, they open their pitch to the landowner by talking about how conservation is the solution to the landowner's problem. It's going to save you time. It's going to save you money. It's going to secure your farm for the long run. And then they close by talking about how it's good for the environment. So they open up speaking to the landowner's concerns, and then they close with their own concerns. And in the world of sales, opening and closing are the yin and the yang, the right punch and the left hook. You got to open and you got to close. They are equally important and they're both absolutely necessary. But the mentors open by speaking first to the landowner's perspective, and they close by talking about the conservation values. And here I have an example where the gentleman on the right, we're going to pretend that he's a conservation field staff person, is saying, better fences will help you get your cattle back to the barn faster. That saves the farmer time. Time is money. That is a opening with the pitch of how it works for the landowner's benefit. And then the field staffer closes by saying, and because it protects the stream, I can help you pay for that. I have cost share to offer you. So the landowner's needs get addressed first, and then the conservation value gets addressed at the end. And this is how really successful conservation field staff usually approach landowners, particularly when they don't know that landowner very well. And I have just a couple of findings out of all the research that speaks to that. And so this is one of the questions that we asked in one of the focus groups. And we asked the mentors to talk about how do you get the ball rolling when you're visiting the property? And the questions that they were suggesting asking are here, like, what are your goals for your property? What are you most proud of about this property? What are you hoping to get from my visit today? They're starting that conversation by letting the landowner do the talking about the landowner's goals for the land and their experience for the land. And what they are not doing right at the beginning is asking about what are some of the solutions you're considering? Have you ever given a thought to a riparian buffer? Do you have any soil and water conservation concerns? They get to that later, but they start by letting the landowner speak about what the landowner's goals are and the landowner's needs. Then they come around to the conservation questions specifically. And here's a couple of quotes that came out of our focus groups and interviews. And what you see there is that the word trust comes up again and again and again and again. What these top field staff told us over and over is that earning trust of the landowner is paramount and it takes time. And so you see statements like, it may take several visits to build trust. I gotta move all these GoToWebinar boxes around here. It's all about trust. Until they trust you, you're not going to make any headway. I try to let them know that I'm working for them. The conservation field staff that are really good at this job go into a new relationship with the landowner thinking that job number one is to earn their trust. And the way they earn that trust is by being a really good listener. Now, and here's a story that one of the mentors told me, and this is not the actual farmer in question, but so this Michigan conservation field staff person had a good relationship with a farmer and had been out to the farm many times, and they'd put a few practices in place, and they had a good trusting relationship. But he was never able to get this landowner to sign up on the filter strips, the contour stripping through the field. And every time he went out to visit this farmer, the farmer was out riding his horse. The farmer, one of the benefits of being a farmer from this gentleman's perspective is he got to ride his horse all day, and he would ride all around his farm on the horse. And whenever the conservation field staff person rolled up in his pickup truck, the farmer would come out to meet him on the horse. And so eventually this conservation field staff person gets the bright idea of pitching a practice to the farmer based on his interest in horses. And the pitch is, if you put filter strips, contour strips on your field, you can ride your horse through there without trampling your crops. So he pitched the conservation field practice to the farmer as horse highways, and then the landowner bit. He didn't bite on it as a water quality practice. He bought on it as horse paths around his farm, but the filter strips are in place, benefiting water quality all the same. Now, the second thing that these mentors told us is that it's really important for rookies and people who are new in this to develop active listening skills and network in the community. And this is actually more important than subject matter expertise. Community networking is more important than subject matter expertise. And here's an example. So imagine that the gentleman in the top runs across Denise, who is a landowner that he's hoping might put some conservation practices in place. And he says, "Hi, Denise, is your son playing today?" They're at a high school soccer game, of course. And she says, "Yes, he's graduating this year. He's only got a few games left." So now a seasoned, savvy, highly skilled conservation field staff is just about to learn something really important. She's going to tell this person, maybe the son's staying on the farm and there's an extra set of hands. There's an extra set of hands on the farm next year. That might be the opportunity to go in there and put those practices in place that this landowner's been thinking about but could never quite get around to. If the son is going off to college, then there's going to be fewer hands on the farm, and that maybe tells this conservation field staff person they should pitch the conservation practice as a labor-saving device. You could put the fences, it'll make it easier to get the cattle back into the barn when your son is away at college. Community networking like this, just making small talk with the landowners when you run into it, they start dropping the clues about what their situation is on their land and what kind of practices they may or may not be receptive to. Now, in one of our surveys, we gave those mentors a list of 8 skills or 9 skills that they felt were really important for people to learn. And first we asked them, if someone's brand new on the job, what are the skills that they should learn? And then we asked them, if someone's been on the job 3 to 5 years, what are those skills that they should be focusing on? And here you see that when they're first coming in, when you're brand new on the job, actively listening to landowners and networking in the community are number 1 and number 2 for the rookies. Fast forward 3 to 5 years, and networking in the community is number 2, and actively listening to landowners is number 3. They're kind of portraying it as a lifelong skill of being part of the community, getting out, getting known, listening to the landowners, and it never stops. It's the most important thing when you first start, and it continues to be critical all the way throughout your career. So for networking, it was interesting what they had to say. Of course, many land trusts, conservation districts, watershed organizations hold workshops and go to workshops organized by others aimed at agriculture. And our mentors like those for sure. They like them. They gave them number 1 and number 3. But you'd be surprised at the importance they place on going to high school football games and plays and dances and other events, going to the civic groups, hanging out at restaurants where the farmers gather. These people who are really good at this work are doing their best to be visible and engaged and active in the community so they can run across the landowners, the ones who own the land, the ones who can conserve the land, wherever they might be found. Now, this is actually one of our mentors here. This is Aaron from Michigan. And one of the things that he told us is that what he loves best to talk about is conservation. He'll talk your ear off about riparian buffers and filter strips and stream exclusion fencing and easements and all the different kinds of things that you might be interested in seeing. But what he is thinking about time and time and time again is managing the workload, his appointment calendar, his to-do list, his meeting notes, his quarterly reports. The mentors believed what they told us. One of the things they told us that they did differently from everybody else is that they tried really hard to manage their workload and stay on top of that, because the longer you stay in the community, the more networking you do, the more contacts you have, the more follow-ups you have, the more reminders you got to send. And the mentors had a really good attitude about the fact that their workload was growing and were very diligent about devising some kind of a personal system, whatever it was, that worked for them to stay on top of it. And it was really striking in that survey to see how that changes over time. So again, these are skills for the rookies who are brand new on the job, and skills for the sort of the mid-career people who've been on the job a few years. And of course, if you're brand new on the job, you got to understand how landowners are using that land. Is it farms? Is it corn? Is it cattle? Is it forest? What are they doing? But after 3 to 5 years, that kind of falls down to the bottom, because at some point, if you've been working in a community for a while, you're going to know how the landowners in the area are using that land. But look at what jumped. Staying on top of the ever-growing workload. If you're brand new, you don't hardly know anybody in the community, your workload is usually pretty low. But once you have been on the job for 3 to 5 years, figuring out how to stay on top of that ever-growing workload becomes number 1 on the list. That's how important these mentors are about workload management being one of the keys to real success at working with private landowners. Here are a few quotes from the mentors. I have 2 calendars and a weekly to-do list. Outlook calendar helps me block off time to do my most important work. I put reminders in my personal calendar too. Establishing discipline is critical to keeping up on projects and the priorities given your time on the job. Once the mentors realized that I actually cared about how they managed their workload, they talked my ear off on all of the different ways that they do it. Now, of course, each person has their own design system that they've all worked out. There's not some one-size-fits-all solution to this. But what really struck me is how intent they were on figuring out how to stay on top of it and how much thought and care they had given to workload management. So we're going to go do a little exercise here. So let's take a look at that muddy muddy pit with the horse running around. That's a problem. Now, over here on the right, we have a conservation professional. You see she's hugging the trees. So I picked this photo as a stand-in for all of you. And here we have a gentleman in overalls who I've selected this photo to be a representative of the farm community. Of course, these are stock photos. So now both the tree hugger and the farmer are looking at this muddy pit. And if you're a watershed person, you might find yourself thinking something like, I want to fix that mud pit to stop all the sedimentation. That's your resource concern. I want to fix that mud pit to stop the sedimentation. If you're a farmer, you might see it this way. I want to fix that mud pit because my horses keep losing their shoes in there. It's the same problem, but the farmer sees one side of it first, and the watershed professional sees another side of it first. And nearly every environmental problem or opportunity that you can see on a piece of rural land in a watershed is going to be that way. It's a problem for the environment in one way, and it's a problem for the landowner in a different way. And our mentors, the people who are top in the field, are really good at seeing environmental problems and imagining, if I was the landowner, how would that be a problem for me rather than for the river, and opening their pitch to the landowner based on that. So the way this conversation might go is this environmental person here might say, I think you want to restore your pen here so your horses aren't living in the mud all the time, losing their shoes and getting diseases in their feet. And because this is going to stop sedimentation in the river, I can help you pay for it. So now one of the big takeaways that came out of this project, something that we needed but had never seen before, is a comprehensive list of the benefits and the barriers to some conservation practices from the perspective of the landowner. This work is all out there, but it has never been synthesized in some complete list. So let's think about something like a riparian buffer. One of the things that watershed professionals and land trusts and everyone concerned with the Chesapeake Bay, we need a lot more miles, many hundreds and thousands of more miles of riparian buffer all around rivers and streams. Now, from the farmer's perspective, riparian buffers have certain advantages. They can solve certain problems. They can keep cattle out of the creek, which is a high-risk area for calving. They can reduce erosion of the farmer's land into the creek, which is a loss of productive land. They don't have to mow as much. They can get CREP rental payments. It can help meet their requirements for other cost share. By keeping their cattle out of the water, the cattle will catch fewer waterborne diseases, so the herd is healthier, and they'll have lower vet bills. The riparian buffer can give you privacy from your neighbors, which is very attractive to some rural residents. And of course, it's good for hunting and fishing. Note that all of these benefits to the landowner, this is a long list of real benefits for a riparian buffer that could make a landowner say, yes, I want those things. And not any of these refer to the benefit for the creek. You already know how to say how a riparian buffer is good for the stream, why it's beneficial for the waterway, but can you open by describing that riparian buffer as a benefit to the landowner directly? And of course, even if you do, the landowner is going to have some objections, such as the loss of land for production. They may think it's weedy and poorly groomed. Taking care of all those trees is a pain in the butt. What are the neighbors going to think about this? Some of the plants that we like as conservation professionals, they don't like. You put fences in place, you got to fix them when the flood comes. The CREP rental payments are nice, but the contracts have a lot of red tape, and on and on. These are the good things about riparian buffers from the landowner's perspective, and some of the objections that you are likely to hear. And we'll send around this complete list after the webinar, so you have it handy. We couldn't find anything like this anywhere else. This is one of the deliverables that came out of the project that our community has been needing. Now, this is just one practice. This is, of course, the riparian buffer. Other practices, we gave it the same treatment. So taking cropland like corn and soybeans that take tons of fertilizer, tons of pesticides, converting that to a perennial grassland or pasture, shrubs or trees. There's a lot of benefits to a landowner for this conversion, and then there's a few objections as well. Excluding livestock from the stream bank fencing, lots of benefits to the landowner from these practices, lots of concerns that they have as well. No-till and cover crops, we know why they're good for the creek. Here's why they're good for the farmer, regardless of the creek. And then here are some of the challenges that the farmer is going to have to overcome, some of the objections that they might have if they're going to convert to no-till and cover crops. Nutrient management, there's a lot of benefits for the landowner for these practices, and then there are some barriers as well. And of course, easements, land trusts are in the easement business. Lots of benefits to easements for a landowner beyond the natural resources. Lots of barriers to the easement from the landowner's perspective, not just environmental ones. The mentors have internalized over their long careers, and most of our mentors have been at this work for 1, 2, sometimes even 3 decades. They've internalized all of these benefits and barriers. And in their conversations with landowners, they can move back and forth very easily between here are the things that make an easement attractive to you, to open the conversation, and then here are the reasons that the easement is good for the environment, and that's why I can help you pay for this, that's why I can provide technical assistance for this, to close the conversation. They know going into that conversation that the landowner is going to have certain concerns that they may or may not volunteer, but they have anticipated these objections and thought about how they might respond if the landowner raises some of these objections. Now, we'll get this list around to you when we share the slides at the end of the conversation. If you're serious about working with landowners on a voluntary basis to put some of these practices into place, I would encourage you to think really hard about reviewing these matrices before you're meeting with a landowner to start discussing a practice that you've got your eye on for a certain piece of land. And now we're going to do a little exercise around this. So I got to send you a link. So here is the big trick. Let's see how my go-to webinar skills are. Oh, okay. So the way this works, Carly, is I got to send the link to you, and then you've got to send it to everybody else. Carly, can you do that?
Yep, on it.
All righty. So what we're sending around is a link to this handout right here. And what you see on that handout is a farm. And on the first page of the farm, I'm not using my usual computer in this touchpad. I do not like it. On the first page of the handout is a farm with a lot of problems. You see that there's mud running off of the field into the stream. You see that the cows are in the stream. You see that there's water all around the barn. You see the farmer and the tree-hugging environmental professional both looking very concerned. And so what I want you to do is take a look at that handout. Let me pull it up on this screen right here. And for each item, you've got the farmer's perspective, the landowner's perspective on that problem, and then your perspective on that problem. So the first item here, we've got the kids playing around the barn, and the landowner's concern is after the farm has been in the family for many generations, the farm might not stay in the family. The farmer is concerned about losing the family farm, the farm leaving the family. But the tree hugger here has a related but different concern. If the farm leaves the family, it might get sold to developers. we'd rather have a farm that we can put some practices in place on than another subdivision. Same problem, two perspectives on it. And I want to give you 6 minutes to go through the rest of this list. What do we see here, number 2, with this chicken house? What's the landowner's concern with the chicken house? What's the tree hugger's concern with the chicken house? How about these cows in the creek? What's the landowner's concern with the cows in the creek? What's the tree hugger's concern with cows in the creek? I'll give you 6 minutes to go through these and try and see all the problems that you see here, one perspective on it, and then the other perspective on it, and then we will have a short discussion. So to get that handout, you just pull open the link that Carly sent around. One thing to remember when we get into the discussion, put your answers in the chat section, not in the question section. Because if you put something in the question section, we'll get to it at the end. If you put it in the chat session, we will use it here in the webinar right now. All right, I'm curious what people have come up with. Don't need to drag this out. Let's take a look at number 2 here. We got a chicken house with a bunch of stinky chicken manure piled around the side. Would somebody on the line care to send a chat and tell us what they think the farmer's concern about that chicken manure and that chicken house might be? Who wants to take a crack at why this is a problem for the farmer?
We're seeing a couple pop into the questions panel. We have chickens getting sick, CAFO compliance.
CAFO compliance for sure. And what's our concern? What's the conservation environmental concern about the chicken house?
Pathogens.
Pathogens, nutrients, and on and on. Yep, there you go. All right, we'll just do one more here. How about number 4? I've got a mama cow and a calf in the creek, and then there's mud running into the creek from the horse pen. What's the landowner's concern about that situation? And what's the environmental concern about that situation?
Loss of life for young cows, herd health.
Yep, loss of life for young cows, herd cows is a great answer. We tend to think we got to protect the creek from the cows, but the landowner's perspective is I want to protect my cows from the creek. The water might be dirty, the bank might be steep. There's a lot of things that can go wrong for your herd if they are moving freely in and out of the creek to get water. That is one of the more dangerous aspects of the farm for your herd. And a lot of the solutions that protect the creek from the cows are also protecting the cows from the creek. So now let's go back to the slide deck here. And when we send the deck around, you'll have basically the answer key where lots of the farmer's perspective, the landowner's perspective on what's wrong with that farm is here on the left-hand side, and then the environmental perspective on what's wrong with that farm on the right-hand side. And again, the mentors are really good at opening the conversation, speaking to the landowner's concerns here on the left. And once the landowner has trust that the conservation person is trying to help them, then the environmental concern here comes in on the right as the reason that we can help you pay for it, we can help you put it into place. Get their attention by talking about things like this, close the deal by explaining that it's in the public interest to help you solve the problem. So now let's look at the flip side of that same handout, which is, I guess, right over here. And here you see a perfectly immaculate piece of rural land. Everything has been fixed. And you know, because here you see the landowner and the tree hugger, they're shaking hands about all the great work that they've done on the farm. And so what have they done? Well, here we are. The farmer was concerned about losing the farm. And the solution is that tax breaks, cost share, easements, etc., have helped the family hang on to the farm. So that's a win. It's a win-win. The landowner gets to keep the farm, and the conservation professional doesn't have another subdivision in their watershed that they have to tangle with. Let me give you 4 minutes to think about the rest. What are some of the solutions that this conservation professional helped this landowner adopt to get this farm all cleaned up? When you reply, it's better if you put it in the chat section than in the Q&A box. Just we'll figure it out one way or another. But if you can put it in the chat to me, that would be great. All right, I'm curious what you came up with. So all that manure is gone from around the chicken house. What kind of assistance did the conservation professional provide to the farmer to help with that? Who wants to take a guess?
And guys, we might be having a little bit of trouble with our chat section, so questions is fine. I can just read out your answers. I have nutrient management plan.
Yeah, nutrient management plan. That's awesome. And so now up here, we had a bunch of cows that were all drinking in the creek, and now there's a fence that keeps them out of the creek, and there's a well for them to get their water out of. That's a big improvement for this waterway. How did the conservation community, how did the conservation professional help that landowner get it into place?
A cost share for fencing cattle out of streams.
Terrific. So here, again, in the deck, which we will share with you later, is the answer key to all of that if you are curious about seeing that entire list. So here is contact information for Jennifer and myself. Here I am on the left, Eric Eckel, Waterworks at Work. That's my phone number and my email address. And Jennifer Miller Herzog on the right, that's her phone number and email address. We've reached the end of our formal presentation. We've got about 10 minutes left in the hour to take your questions. So with that, Jennifer, if you want to pop back on the webcam, and Carly, if you want to help us manage any questions that are coming in from the audience, we would sure appreciate it.
If any questions out there, you can just throw them into the questions box.
While we're waiting, I just wanted to address one thing that I found interesting and a little bit surprising until we talked to some of our mentors. There was, when we looked at what was most helpful to have, like detailed point-by-point knowledge of lots of programs and practices was not high on the list, I think, for either the rookies or the mid-career folks. And what we learned from our mentors is that they typically had a team of about 10 to 12 partners that they worked with who were just part of their core team in working with landowners on practices. They didn't feel like they needed to know every single thing. They needed to have a really good, tight group of experts that they worked with so that when a landowner was ready to have a conversation about this practice, they had someone at the conservation district who they knew and trusted who could provide that information quickly and easily. So that was something that I found interesting and heard over and over from the mentors, that they just work with the team. It's just you out there, really.
And I'll mention that, Jennifer started the conversation by pointing out that it's an unusual time and it's difficult for all of you to get out there on the land right now. We're still working with our Michigan clients on promoting their voluntary stewardship program, and we're running a couple of advertising campaigns on social media and on Google right now in Michigan when everybody's quarantined. And what we are seeing is that our results have improved during this difficult period. Our only possible explanation is that people are stuck at home, they're spending more time on the internet. Some of these big, long, difficult decisions like conservation practices, they've got a little time on their hands to click on click on ads, visit websites, and give this some thought. So at least with this one anecdotal evidence, it's actually a really good time to be not visiting the farm, of course, but bringing your programs and your opportunities to landowners in other ways, because they're stuck at home just like the rest of us, and it's probably a pleasant diversion to be thinking about anything else.
Awesome. Well, you two must have addressed every potential question. Oh, here's one. You mentioned that attending community events and extracurriculars as a method of networking, getting to know the community. The best mentors spend a lot of personal and off-time work networking and attending community events as an approach to work. I guess that's the question. So, yeah.
I guess the question is are they basically working 24/7 on weekends and in the evenings to doing this thing? I didn't get that impression from the mentors. I just got the impression that they felt that by being approachable and being quick to approach people as they were living their lives, and to strike up that conversation, they were earning the trust of the landowners. I didn't get the sense that any of them were going to the high school football game if they didn't have a kid in high school. But if they went to the high school football game to watch their kid play or to support their kid, they would keep an eye out for some of the landowners that they might see in the crowd and make a point of walking up and saying hello and make a little small talk if they ran into them. Which is obviously a really hard thing to do these days. But hopefully we will get back to normal at some point. Jennifer and I would much rather give you this information at the River Rally in person than via webinar, but we're all doing the best that we can.
Yep.
So Carly, we're going to want to send this deck around to everybody who joined us. How is the best way for us to do that?
So I have the webinar recording here, and we will send out the recording shortly after this meeting concludes.
Terrific.
Great. And Eric, in the meantime, I had gotten the participant list earlier while you were presenting. I wanted to see who of you was on the phone, and it's really exciting to see a really broad cross section of people, but both local and state agencies, technical service providers in the field, land trusts, watershed groups, water authorities. So thanks to all of you for joining. I think, that's the profile of these teams of people who get this work done on the ground, is that mix. So
thank you all very much for your time this afternoon. We really enjoyed doing all this work, and we hope it's beneficial for you in some way.
Getting a bunch of thank yous over here.
Great. Stay in touch. Let us know if we can help.